Many of us have been encouraged to dream big. My guest today has taken that to heart. Some of his work is big. A lot of it is colossal. We're talking to potter Stephen Procter in his Brattleboro, Vermont studio.
Coming your way. And then just guide it on so we get a little overhang.
When you start the process, do you have the pot in mind? Do you know what you're going to try to throw, what the shape is going to look like, how big it's going to be?
I have a general idea, because when I throw that first section, I need to make a base that's going to be harmonious with the shape as a whole. I think I'm responding more to an impulse than to a form. So I start with a general sense of scale and mood, and then I think of it as jazz sometimes. There's a chart that gives me certain parameters, but there's a lot of room to improvise.
How long have you been making these big pieces?
Well, I got seduced by clay about 12 years ago. Interestingly, I owe it to my daughter in part. She was 9 or 10 at the time and taking a pottery class with a local teacher. I went in one day to pick her up. I arrived early, and she was working on a kick wheel, and I had never watched anybody throwing before. And I was mesmerized, as people often are. There's a space of one-pointed attention and focus and calm and clarity that I just found really compelling. And I thought, wow, I want to check this out sometime. So that seed was planted, and it probably took me a year or so to get around to signing up for a pottery class at a local studio. So I took a semester of that and then started renting studio space. And I was sort of the ugly duckling in terms of learning to throw on the wheel from the class, but I had a high tolerance for failure. Sometimes the piece sort of takes on a life of its own, and the curve starts suggesting something a little different than I imagined.
I see you as the dream catcher. What were you doing before you got into pottery?
I have always worked in arts and culture, largely doing grant writing and fundraising. And I've had this parallel track of my artistic life as well, which for many years was classical guitar. And in a certain sense, moving into clay has been an interesting translation, if you will, of my musical background. I see this as, in a certain sense, crystallized music, and the same principles of flow and direction and articulation and balance and repetition and contrast. All these things are happening in space here rather than through time as they do in music. I said I love it when they get to this stage and the character of the piece really starts to emerge.
Was there a person, was there something that just inspired you to go big? Or, I mean, you're a big guy.
I'm a big guy. It felt natural to me to go big. I like making big gestures. It's consistent with my musical impulse.
A lot of potters create mugs and cups and glasses and things that are practical. What is the practical purpose of one of your pots?
That's a great question. A lot of people, when they see the pots, for instance, when I have an open house, there's this fascination of what's in it. You know, and everybody wants to look in, or they want me to make a pot big enough they can meditate in it, or they're talking about the snakes they imagine are in it. I think of them as useful as objects of contemplation. And as an object that can create an atmosphere and a focus to a space, whether indoors or outdoors. It's really quite magical what happens in a space when suddenly a resonant object takes up residence in a corner or at the end of a walkway. There's suddenly a sense of focus and rearrangement of everything around it that's quite magical.
I have to say that I have one of your pots in my yard, and it is a source of potential. I see that every time I leave the house and every time I return, and there's a thing that is strong and important, and its importance is just its being there.
That's lovely. I think also the fact of it being a vessel, there's something very elemental that people respond to there. There's resonance with the forms of the human body, of course, but there's also this quality of holding and creating space and being held. that I think speaks to people at a very deep level.